He had $11 left in his wallet, and he slid every single one of them across the diner counter for a stranger. Not for his daughter. Not for himself. For a woman he had never met, standing in the freezing rain, too proud to beg, and too broken to ask. That one decision made by a tired, hungry, white single father in a worn-out jacket would trigger a chain of events so extraordinary that even he couldn't believe it was real. And the woman he helped? She wasn't who anyone thought she was. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if kindness still moves you, hit subscribe. This channel is built for people who still believe it matters. The moment Ethan Carter opened his wallet that Tuesday night, he already knew the answer. He counted it twice, the way a man does when he hopes the numbers will change if he looks again. They didn't. $11.43. A crumpled 531s, some loose change scattered at the bottom like an accusation. That was it. That was everything standing between him and the next paycheck, which was still 4 days away. He folded the wallet shut and slid it back into the pocket of jacket, a navy blue Carhartt that had seen better winters. The left cuff fraying at the edge, a small grease stain near the collar that never fully came out, no matter how many times he washed it. He didn't think about the jacket. He had stopped thinking about things like that a long time ago. What he thought about was Emily. She was sitting across from him in the corner booth of Henderson's Diner, the small neighborhood place 3 blocks from their apartment, the kind of restaurant that had the same laminated menus for 20 years and a pie case by the register that was always half empty. Emily had her elbows on the table, something her teachers would have corrected, and she was studying the menu the way an 8-year-old studies a treasure map. Seriously. With total commitment. Dad, she said, without looking up, do you think they still have the grilled cheese with the tomatoes inside? The good kind, not the mushy kind. I think so, Bug. Because last time it was mushy. She scrunched her nose. I didn't say anything because the lady who brought it looked tired. But it was mushy. Ethan looked at his daughter at the gap where her front tooth used to be, at the little braids he'd done himself that morning. Slightly uneven because he'd learned from YouTube tutorials and not from anyone who actually knew what they were doing. He felt that specific ache that only fathers understand. The one that has no name. You didn't say anything because you were being kind, he told her. Yeah. She finally looked up, but also because I was really hungry. He laughed. A real one. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're exhausted. Ethan had been a warehouse worker for 6 years. The kind of job where your back talks to you in the morning before your alarm does. Where your hands never fully lose the roughness, no matter how much lotion you use. Where you clock in at 5:45 a.m. and the fluorescent lights overhead make everyone look like they're already dead. He wasn't complaining. The job paid, and in his world, a job that paid was a job worth keeping. But warehouse work alone didn't pay enough. Not in the suburbs outside Chicago. Not with rent, and Emily's after-school program, and the electric bill, and the car insurance on a 2009 Ford Focus that needed new brake pads and was making a sound he'd been pretending not to hear for 3 weeks. So 3 nights a week, after putting Emily to bed, Ethan drove deliveries. Pizza sometimes. Packages for an app. Groceries. He didn't care what it was. He'd pick up a bag, drive it somewhere, hand it to a stranger, who barely looked at him, and go back for another one. He did this until midnight, sometimes 1 in the morning. Then he went home, set his alarm for 4:45, and started again. He had been doing this for 2 years. He never told anyone at work. He didn't want pity. He didn't want advice. He just wanted to keep the lights on and make sure Emily had what she needed, and that was enough reason to get up every single morning, even when his body said no. Tonight, though, he'd made a decision. It was Emily's idea, originally. She'd mentioned 3 times in the past week that she missed Henderson's. Not in a whiny way. Emily wasn't a whiner. She'd mentioned it the way kids mention things when they're trying not to seem like they want something too much. Casually. Offhandedly. As if the idea had just occurred to her. Ethan had heard it every time. So here they were. Tuesday night. Booth in the corner. Laminated menus and the smell of coffee. And something frying in the kitchen. He'd calculated it before they came. A grilled cheese for Emily. A bowl of soup for himself, the cheapest thing on the menu, at $4.50, and he could make the numbers work. Barely. But they'd work. He'd skip lunch tomorrow. It wouldn't be the first time. The waitress, a woman, Donna, who had worked at Henderson's since before Ethan moved to the neighborhood, and who had once slipped an extra dinner roll onto Emily's plate, without being asked, came over and took their order. Emily asked, very politely, whether the grilled cheese had tomatoes inside, and whether they were the mushy kind or the good kind. And Donna had looked at her, with the expression of someone who genuinely appreciated the question. The good kind, sweetheart. I'll make sure of it. Emily gave a thumbs up. Ethan ordered the soup. When Donna walked away, Emily looked at him. You always get soup, Dad. I like soup. You like soup when it's the cheapest thing. He blinked. His daughter was 8 going on 45. I like soup when it's cold outside, he said. Which it is. Emily seemed to accept this, or at least decided to let him have it. She turned to look out the window at the street, the way she always did when she was thinking. It was a thing she did. She'd get quiet and just look out at the world, like she was reading something nobody else could see. He'd watched her do it since she was a toddler. He never interrupted it. Outside, the rain was picking up. Not a storm, just that miserable, relentless Chicago cold weather rain that finds the gap between your collar and your neck no matter what you wear. The streetlight at the corner was flickering. A few people hurried past on the sidewalk, heads down, hoods up, the universal posture of people who want to get somewhere else. And then Emily went very still. Ethan noticed. He followed her gaze. Across the street, just outside the glow of the diner window, stood a woman. She was large, a plus-size woman in her late 30s, wearing a jacket that was soaked through at the shoulders, her brown hair damp and flat against her face. She was holding a plastic bag close to her chest, not like she was guarding it, but like it was the only thing she had to hold. She wasn't moving. She wasn't looking at the diner. She was just standing there in the rain, eyes cast downward, completely still in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the stillness of someone who has learned not to expect anything. Dad, Emily said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Yeah, Bug? That lady outside. She looks really cold. Ethan looked. He already knew what he was seeing. He'd seen it before. On corners, in parking lots, outside convenience stores. He knew the particular way a person stands when they're homeless in the rain and they've already processed the embarrassment of it and come out the other side into something quieter and more permanent. He felt the pull immediately. He also felt the $11 in his pocket. She does look cold, he said carefully. She needs help. Emily turned to face him, not demanding, not performing, just stating a fact, the way children do when they haven't yet learned to talk themselves out of what they can plainly see. She needs help, Dad. Ethan sat with that for a moment. He did the math. Again, he was already doing it. Soup for him. Sandwich for Emily. If he helped the woman, if he bought her something, anything, he'd have almost nothing left. He'd be getting to the next paycheck on fumes. The brake pad sound under his car had gotten slightly worse this week. He hadn't eaten a full meal since Sunday. He thought about all of that. And then he thought about something he had said to Emily once when she'd come home from school upset because a boy in her class had been mocking another kid for wearing old shoes. He'd sat her down and told her, Bug, a person's situation doesn't decide their worth. And what you do when nobody's watching, that's who you actually are. He'd meant it when he said it. He pushed back from the table. Hey, Emily said immediately. Where are you going? I'll be right back. He walked out the front door of Henderson's into the rain. It hit him the way November in Chicago always does, instantly, completely, without negotiation. He crossed the diner's small awning and stepped out onto the sidewalk. And within about 4 seconds, his jacket was damp at the shoulders and the cold had gotten into his collar. He walked toward the woman. She saw him coming from about 10 feet away, and he watched something flicker across her face, a split second of calculation. The kind of look a person learns to have when they've spent enough time being approached by strangers with unpredictable intentions. Her jaw tightened slightly. Her grip on the plastic bag shifted. Ethan stopped a respectful distance away. He didn't crowd her. Hey, he said, I'm Ethan. I'm not trying to bother you. He paused. My daughter and I are eating inside. I wanted to ask if you'd like a hot meal. On me. No strings. Silence. She looked at him with those tired eyes, the eyes of someone who has been told, in 100 different ways, to disappear. She searched his face the way you search for the catch, the angle, the thing somebody always wants. I'm fine, she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected, quiet but steady. Thank you. You don't have to come in if you don't want to, Ethan said. I can bring something out. But it's really cold, and I've got a few dollars, and I'd feel a lot better knowing you had something warm in you tonight. She looked at him again. Why, she said. It wasn't accusatory. It was just the word. Honest. Stripped down, the most basic question a human being can ask another human being. Why are you doing this? Ethan thought about it for a second. He didn't give her the polished answer. He gave her the real one. Because my daughter pointed you out and said you needed help. And she's right. And I'm trying to raise her to be a person who does something about that. Something changed in the woman's face. Not a smile, not yet. But the calculation in her eyes shifted into something softer, more uncertain. Like a door that hadn't been opened in a long time and wasn't sure if it remembered how. She sounds like a good kid, the woman said. She's the best person I know, Ethan said. And she's 8, which is embarrassing for me personally, but there it is. A pause. And then barely the woman almost smiled. Claire, she said. My name is Claire. Nice to meet you. Claire. Come inside, please. They walked back in together. Donna, to her eternal credit, didn't miss a beat. She grabbed an extra menu, found them a spot in the booth, next to Ethan and Emily's, and brought over a glass of water without being asked. You could see her reading the situation in the practiced way of someone who has worked a diner long enough to understand that some moments require action and not commentary. Emily looked at Claire with that open, direct attention that children have before they learn to look away from things that make adults uncomfortable. She looked at her wet hair and her damp jacket and her hands wrapped around the water glass. And then she smiled. Hi, she said. I'm Emily. Do you like grilled cheese? They make it really good here. The tomatoes aren't mushy. Claire looked at this child, and something behind her eyes, something that had been held very tight for a very long time, shifted. I love grilled cheese, she said, and her voice cracked at the end. Just slightly, just enough that you could hear it if you were paying attention. Ethan pretended not to notice. He picked up his menu. Get whatever you want, he told Claire. Seriously, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm deciding to. He kept his eyes on the menu. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. You don't know me, she said. I know you're cold and you haven't eaten. He looked up. That's enough for tonight. Claire tried, twice more, to refuse. Both times, Ethan redirected. Not in a way that was aggressive or that made her feel steamrolled. Just calm, steady persistence, the kind that comes from a man who has dealt with more no's than most, and learned that sometimes you have to hold the door open long enough for someone to walk through it. She ended up ordering the chicken soup. The real kind, with egg noodles and a thick broth, and a piece of cornbread on the side. Emily told her about her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who had the loudest laugh in the entire school, and who let them have free reading time on Fridays if they finished their work. She told Claire about the book she was reading, about a girl who finds a dragon egg in her backyard, and how she was pretty sure she would handle it better than the girl in the book, who made some questionable decisions. Claire listened to all of it. She asked questions. Real ones, not the polite, half-paying attention questions. Adults ask children to seem interested, but actual questions, like she wanted to know the answers. Ethan watched this from across the table. He ate his soup slowly, making it last, listening to the rain outside, and to the sound of his daughter's voice, and to the quiet sound of a woman who had been invisible for a long time being seen again by a child who didn't know any reason not to see her. When their food was done, Donna came by. Ethan paid. He left a $2 tip, which was more than he could afford, but there are some nights when you just do it. Claire stood up to go. She had dried off some. She looked not warm, not safe, not fixed, but something. A degree or two above where she'd been an hour earlier. I don't know how to thank you, she said to Ethan. She stopped. People don't usually. They walk past. Or they look at me like I'm a problem they don't want to deal with. She pressed her lips together. You didn't do that. You're not a problem. Ethan said simply. You're a person. She nodded. She was fighting something. He could see that. Keeping something inside that would have been embarrassing for her to let out in a diner in front of a stranger and his 8-year-old. She crouched down slightly and looked at Emily. You've got a good dad, she said. Emily considered this with the gravity of a scholar. I know, she said. He makes really bad grilled cheese at home, though. Don't let him tell you different. Claire laughed. A real one. Full-throated, surprised like it caught her off guard, like she'd almost forgotten she still had it in her. Ethan laughed too. For a second, they were just people in a diner at the end of a rainy Tuesday night. Claire put her jacket back on, still damp, and picked up her plastic bag. At the door, she paused and turned back. She looked at Ethan one more time with those tired, watching eyes. And in them, underneath everything else, he saw something he hadn't caught before. Something that didn't quite fit the picture. Something calm and interior, like a room behind a room. He didn't know what to make of it. He figured he would never see her again, and the question would simply dissolve. The way things do. Everyone deserves kindness sometimes, he said. Claire held his gaze for just a moment, longer than necessary. Yes, she said, they do. And she walked out into the rain. Ethan held Emily's hand on the walk home. She was quiet. The way she got after things that meant something to her. The rain had softened into a fine mist. The brake pad sound the Focus made on the way home was a little worse than he remembered. He got Emily bathed and into bed. Read her 3 pages of the Dragon book, she could read it herself. But she liked it when he did voices. He turned off her light and stood in the hallway for a moment, hands still on the doorframe. He had $11 when he walked into Henderson's tonight. He had $2 and some change when he walked out. He stood in the hallway and thought, I made the right call. He thought about Claire's face when Emily talked to her, like she was just a person. He thought about the sound of Claire, laughing, the surprised quality of it, like a sound she'd misplaced and found again. He went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and set his alarm for 4:45. In 4 days he'd have a paycheck. He'd manage the breaks. He'd figure out the rent. He always figured it out. Ethan Carter went to sleep that night, not knowing that the woman he'd bought a bowl of soup for was one of the wealthiest people in the state of Illinois. He didn't know that what looked like a random Tuesday night in a corner booth had been a test carefully, methodically constructed that hundreds of people had already failed. He didn't know that the woman named Claire Morgan, with her wet hair and her plastic bag and her chicken soup, had been watching him with the same quiet, precise attention she turned on every investment she ever made. He didn't know any of it. He just knew he'd done right by his daughter. And for now, that was the only thing that mattered. The next morning came the way it always did for Ethan Carter, too fast and too loud. The alarm hit at 4:45, and he was already half awake, lying in the dark, listening to the building settle around him. Old buildings talk at night. Pipes knock. Floorboards shift. He'd lived in this apartment long enough that he knew every sound by name, knew which creak came from the couple upstairs and which one was just the cold, working its way through the walls. He lay there for 30 seconds. He always gave himself 30 seconds. Exactly, and then he swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up. No stretching. No coffee first. You start moving or you don't start at all. He dressed in the dark because Emily's room shared a wall with his, and she slept light, the way kids do when they've spent their whole lives in small apartments where sound travels. He pulled on his work clothes by feel the thick canvas pants, the thermal undershirt, the warehouse hoodie that had the company logo cracking off the chest. He tied his boots sitting on the edge of the bed, taking his time with the knots because a loose lace at the warehouse meant a turned ankle, and a turned ankle meant missed days, and missed days meant money he didn't have. By 5:15, he was in the kitchen, pouring yesterday's coffee into a travel mug and nuking it for 90 seconds. While he waited, he checked his phone. No messages. No alerts. The bank app showed the same number it had shown last night, which was a number that made him breathe through his nose, slowly and deliberately. He wrote Emily a note, the way he always did, and stuck it to the refrigerator with the magnet shaped like the state of Illinois that she'd picked out at a school fair 2 years ago. Bug cereal on the counter. Milk in the fridge. Don't forget your library book. I'll be home by 6. Love, Dad. He grabbed his mug and his keys and walked out into the dark. The Focus made its sound when he backed out of the parking spot. That grinding, hesitant sound from the front left wheel that had been getting incrementally worse for 3 weeks now. He knew what it was. He'd looked it up online, watched 2 YouTube videos, priced the parts. He was putting it off, not because he didn't know how to fix it, but because the $62 the parts cost was $62 that had a different job right now. He drove to the warehouse in the dark, windows slightly cracked because the defroster only worked on the driver's side, drinking his reheated coffee and running the math in his head the way he did every morning. Rent was 9 days out. He was about $300 short of where he needed to be. The delivery work Thursday and Friday night would close most of that gap. If he picked up a Saturday shift at the warehouse, he could cover the rest and still have something left over. Not much, but something. He did this math every morning. He'd gotten very fast at it. What he did not think about on that drive-in was Claire. Or at least he tried not to. But she kept coming back, that image of her standing in the rain, perfectly still, the plastic bag held against her chest, and the sound of her laugh at the end, the one Emily had surprised out of her. And the way she'd looked at him at the door, that look he couldn't quite categorize, like she was seeing something he wasn't aware of. He shook it off. He had a warehouse to get to. He would not think about Claire Morgan again for 20 asks. And then he would not be able to think about anything else. The days that followed that Tuesday moved the way his days always moved forward, without stopping, with the particular grinding momentum of a life that doesn't have room for pause. Wednesday, he worked the warehouse from 6 to 3 and then spent 2 hours doing a grocery delivery run before picking up Emily from after school. Thursday, he worked overtime to cover a guy who'd called out sick. Friday night, he drove deliveries until 12:30 in the morning and came home to find Emily asleep on the couch, with the dragon book open on her chest, waiting up for him the way she always denied doing. He carried her to bed. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. That was the tax he paid on all of it, the exhaustion, the math, the compromises, and it was the one he paid willingly, every time, without complaint. Saturday, he picked up the warehouse shift. It was brutal. His lower back had been talking to him all week, that deep muscular complaint that comes from years of lifting things that are too heavy with a form that isn't quite right. He stretched on his brakes, drank water, kept moving. By noon, he was running on stubbornness alone. On his lunch break, he sat in the break room with 3 other guys from his line, Marcus, who was 52 and had been at the warehouse longer than anyone, and 2 younger guys whose names Ethan could never keep straight because they both went by nicknames. They were talking about some game that had been on the night before, some play that had happened in the 4th quarter. Ethan listened without listening, eating a sandwich he'd made at 6 that morning, the bread slightly dry now. Marcus looked at him across the table. "You look like something the truck backed over," he said. "Appreciate that, Marcus. I'm you sleeping? 4, 5 hours. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Man, you can't keep doing that. You're gonna run yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." That's what people say right before they're not fine. Ethan took a drink of water. "Emily's got her winter recital coming up. I need to cover the dress and the shoes." Marcus was quiet for a second. He had 3 kids of his own, all grown now. He understood the math without Ethan explaining it. "You need a few days I can cover for you on the line," Marcus said. "I don't need days. I need Thursday's check." "Same thing." They sat in silence for a minute, and that silence had the particular texture that exists between 2 men who understand each other's situation, without either one of them wanting to make it into something dramatic. "You're a good father," Marcus said, finally. Ethan looked at his sandwich. "I'm trying to be. That's the whole job. Trying." Marcus stood up, tossed his cup. "The rest is just details." Ethan thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. He thought about what Marcus said about trying, and he thought about Emily's face that night in the diner, the serious, clear-eyed certainty with which she'd looked at Claire and said, simply, "She needs help, Dad," like it was the most obvious equation in the world. No calculation, no hesitation, just the fact of it. Kids, he thought. They see things so clean. He drove deliveries again that night. Got home at 12:47. Set his alarm. Slept. The week after that was quieter, in the way that quiet weeks sometimes are not because things are better, but because the problems are temporarily familiar and you've found your footing around them. He fixed a slow leak in Emily's bicycle tire using a patch kit he'd had in the closet for a year. He helped her with a book report on something she'd read about penguins. He made his specialty dinner on Wednesday, which Emily referred to as Dad's famous, almost pasta, which was exactly what it sounded like, spaghetti, with a sauce he made from canned tomatoes, garlic, and olive oil, with whatever vegetables were cheapest that week, and which she ate with the enthusiasm of someone who had decided to appreciate what she had. "This is really good," she said on the Wednesday of that second week. "You say that every time, because you make it every time." She pointed her fork at him. "That's the secret. Consistency. Where did you hear the word consistency, Mrs. Patterson?" "Of course." She said consistent effort over time creates results. Emily thought about this. "I think that's true about the pasta." Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, gap tooth, slightly uneven braids, sauce on her chin, laying down philosophy at the dinner table. "I think you're right," he said. But there were other nights, the nights after Emily went to bed, when the apartment went quiet, and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold, when the weight of it was harder to carry. He didn't let Emily see those nights. That was the deal he'd made with himself the year her mother left. When Emily was 4 and barely old enough to register the absence as more than a confusion. He'd made the deal then. "She doesn't carry this. That's mine. I'll carry it." He kept the deal. But the nights were long sometimes. He thought about the rent, and the breaks, and the dress for the recital. He thought about Emily's upcoming dental check and whether the insurance from the warehouse would cover the full thing, or just most of it. He thought occasionally, without meaning to, about what it would be like to not be doing all of this alone. He didn't think about it long. Thinking about it didn't change it. He washed his coffee cup, checked, went to bed. This was his life. He had made peace with it. And he told himself, on the nights when peace was harder to find, that the point wasn't comfort, the point was Emily. The point was building her into someone who would be capable and kind and steady, the kind of person who would not need to be rescued because she would know how to rescue herself, and maybe along the way, rescue other people too. Woman he was protecting. He thought she was already getting there. He thought about the way she'd looked through the diner window at Claire. "She needs help, Dad." He went to sleep. 26 days after that Tuesday at Henderson's, the thing happened that changed everything. It started small, the way most of the things that end up mattering most always do. It was a Thursday morning, early, and Ethan was already at the warehouse when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it until his first break at 8:15, when he pulled it out in the stairwell where it was slightly warmer than the dock floor. He had a voicemail. Unknown number. Chicago area code, but not one he recognized. He almost didn't listen to it. He got spam calls, constantly car warranties, debt consolidation. One weird week where someone kept calling about a timeshare he definitely didn't own. He was 3 seconds from deleting it. He pressed play instead. "Mr. Carter. My name is James Whitfield. I'm a partner at Whitfield and Associates, a law firm based in downtown Chicago. This call concerns a matter of some importance, and I'd prefer to discuss it with you directly, rather than leave details in a message. If you could call back at your earliest convenience, I'd appreciate it. Again, this is James Whitfield. My number is..."
Ethan listened to the number twice.
He did not write it down the first time, because his hand had gone very still, and his brain was running through every terrible scenario that begins with a lawyer calling on a Thursday morning. He was current on the rent. Barely, but current. The car was registered. Insurance was paid. He checked every month. Emily's school? No, it wouldn't be a lawyer for that. Could it be something to do with Rachel? Emily's mother? They hadn't spoken in over a year. There'd been a period, right after she left, where things were complicated legally, where there'd been paperwork and hearings and a family court judge with a very patient face who had granted Ethan sole custody with what felt, at the time, like the most important piece of paper he'd ever touched. He'd thought that was settled. He called the number back. It rang twice. "Whitfield and Associates. This is James Whitfield speaking." The voice was calm, professional, not warm exactly, but measured. The voice of a man who spends his days delivering news that he did not create and has learned to carry it carefully. Mr. Whitfield, this is Ethan Carter. You left me a voicemail. A brief pause. Mr. Carter, thank you for calling back so quickly. I want to assure you before anything else you are not in any legal trouble. This is not a litigation matter. Ethan exhaled through his nose. He hadn't realized how hard he'd been holding his breath. Okay, he said. Then what is it? It concerns a client of mine, Whitfield said carefully. A woman named Claire Morgan. I understand you may have met her approximately 4 weeks ago. The stairwell went very quiet. Ethan's brain did something unusual. It went completely still for a moment. Not blank. Still. The way water goes still, right before something heavy hits it. Claire, he said. Not a question, a confirmation. Yes. Ms. Morgan left instructions with our firm to contact you in the event of certain circumstances. Those circumstances have come to pass, and I would like to schedule a time to meet with you in person, along with my colleague, to discuss her wishes. Ethan pressed his back against the stairwell wall. The sounds of the warehouse, the forklifts, the conveyor belts, the overlapping noise of a building full of people doing physical work suddenly seemed very far away. Is she okay? He asked. Another pause. Shorter this time, but it told him everything. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, Whitfield said. Miss Morgan passed away 11 days ago. Ethan closed his eyes. He hadn't known her. He'd bought her a bowl of soup. He'd spent maybe 40 minutes in the same room with her. He had no logical reason for the feeling that hit him when those words landed. But it hit him anyway. Like news about someone you knew, someone who mattered, someone whose laugh you remembered, because of how surprised it had sounded. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. She was a remarkable woman, Whitfield said. Mr. Carter, I don't want to say more over the phone. Would you be available to meet in person? At our offices? At your convenience? Ethan ran a hand over his jaw. He was standing in a stairwell at a warehouse at 8:20 in the morning, with a lawyer on the phone, telling him that a woman he'd met once in a diner had left instructions about him. What kind of instructions? He asked. The kind best explained in person, Whitfield said. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, and I understand it's unusual. But what I have to share with you is significant, and it deserves a conversation, not a phone call. A pause. Can you come in Monday morning? Whitfield asked. Ethan thought about his Monday schedule, opening shift. He'd have to arrange for Emily's school drop-off. He'd have to ask Marcus to cover the first 2 hours on the line, which Marcus would do without complaint, but which Ethan hated asking for. Yeah, he said. I can come in Monday. He hung up and stood in the stairwell for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then he went back to work, because that was what he did. He didn't tell Marcus about the call. He didn't tell anyone. He spent the rest of Thursday in the mechanical rhythm of warehouse work lift. Move, stack, repeat while the back of his mind turned the thing over and over like a stone it couldn't put down. Claire Morgan. He remembered her face at the diner door. That last look she'd given him. The quality of it that he hadn't been able to name. That room behind a room feeling. He remembered what she'd said. You didn't see a homeless woman. You saw a human being. He didn't know yet that those words had been written down. He didn't know that they were in a letter that a law firm had been holding for him. He drove deliveries Thursday night and came home at 1 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table for a long time before he went to bed. Friday came, Saturday. He worked both days. He helped Emily with her book report. He made almost pasta. He checked the bank account and did the rent math and listened to the brake sound get marginally worse. He tried not to think about Monday. He mostly failed. Sunday night he made sure Emily's school bag was packed and her lunch was ready in the fridge and her library book was in the side pocket where it wouldn't get forgotten. He sat on the edge of her bed while she read the last chapter of the Dragon book herself, her finger moving along the lines, her face doing the thing it did when she was completely absorbed, a small, focused tension at her brow, her lips moving slightly. She closed the book. The girl made the right choice at the end, Emily announced. Yeah? She let the dragon go. Because it was his life, not hers to keep. She set the book on her nightstand with a kind of finality. That was the right choice. Ethan looked at his daughter. You're a smart kid, he said. I know. She pulled her blanket up. Dad? Yeah. Do you think Claire is okay? The lady from the diner? He had not mentioned Claire to Emily since that night. He hadn't known his daughter, had been carrying her around in her head for 4 weeks. He breathed slowly. I don't know, Bug, he said. It was the truth, or close enough to it. Emily was quiet for a moment. I think about her sometimes. I hope she found somewhere warm. Ethan reached over and tucked her blanket more firmly around her shoulders. Me too, he said. She had a nice laugh, Emily said. When I made her laugh. Did you notice? I noticed. It was like she hadn't laughed in a long time and she forgot how good it felt. Emily's eyes were closing now. I liked making her laugh. Ethan sat there until her breathing deepened and she was fully asleep. Then he sat for another few minutes in the dark and quiet of his daughter's room, just breathing. In the morning, he was going to a law firm downtown to find out why a woman he'd met once had left instructions for him. He still had no idea what he was about to walk into. He turned off Emily's lamp and went to bed. Monday morning arrived like a different species of day, the same 4:45 alarm, the same dark apartment, but everything else had a quality he couldn't name. Like the air was waiting for something. He dropped Emily at school 20 minutes early. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Good luck with your meeting," in the tone of a person who has learned to read a room, squeezed his hand, and went through the school doors with her backpack bouncing. He stared after her for a moment. Then he drove downtown. The offices of Whitfield and Associates were on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. Ethan found parking 6 blocks away because the garage attached to the building was $22 an hour, and that was not a sentence he could finish. He walked the 6 blocks in the November air, his good jacket on, not the Carhartt. The other one, the dark one, he kept like court dates, and parent-teacher conferences when he wanted to that he was taking it seriously. The lobby of the building had marble floors and a security desk, and a guy in a blazer who looked him over with the particular neutrality of someone who is professionally non-judgmental, but personally has opinions. Ethan gave his name and the floor number. The guy checked a list, handed him a visitor's badge, and directed him to the elevators without making him feel like he didn't belong, which Ethan appreciated more than he could have explained. The 14th floor was quiet in the way that money is always quiet. Carpeted, warm, the sound of the city swallowed somewhere below. A receptionist led him to a conference room. There were 2 people already in it. James Whitfield was exactly what his voice had suggested, mid-50s. Silver at his temples, the kind of calm that comes from decades of sitting in rooms where people get difficult news. He stood and extended his hand when Ethan entered. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming." "Sure." Ethan shook his hand. Firm. Brief. The other person in the room was a woman Ethan didn't recognize, also a lawyer. He assumed, from the way she held a legal pad and the way she watched him come in, assessing without appearing to. "This is my colleague, Sandra Reeves," Whitfield said. "She worked closely with Miss Morgan on the estate matter." Ethan sat down across from them. On the table between them was a manila folder, thick, closed, and beside the folder a single envelope, sealed, his name written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. He looked at it. "Before we discuss the details," Whitfield said, folding his hands on the table, "I want to give you some context. Context that will help explain why you're sitting in this room." "All right," Ethan said. Whitfield looked at him steadily. "Mr. Carter," he said, "Claire Morgan was not homeless." The room held its breath. Ethan's eyes moved from the envelope to Whitfield's face. He said nothing. He was waiting. His whole body was waiting. "She was one of the wealthiest individuals in the state of Illinois," Whitfield continued. "The owner of Morgan Capital Investments, a private equity firm. She built over a period of 22 years. Currently valued at, well, the number is significant. She was, by any measure, an extraordinarily successful businesswoman." Ethan sat with that. He ran it back: Claire in the rain, the damp jacket, the plastic bag, the careful way she'd tried to refuse the meal, the exhausted eyes, all of it. He ran it back and felt something turn over in his chest. "Why?" he said. His voice was steady, but just barely. "Why was she?" "That's what I want to explain," Whitfield said. 12 years ago, Ms. Morgan's younger sister, a woman named Diane, developed severe mental illness. The illness progressed quickly, and Diane eventually became homeless, despite Claire's efforts to get her help. She lived on the streets for over a year. He paused. During that year, Diane repeatedly told Claire about how people treated her, how they looked through her, how they crossed the street to avoid her, how she would sit in cold doorways for hours, and not one person would stop. He paused again. Diane died of exposure during a winter storm. She was 31 years old. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said. After Diane died, Whitfield continued. Claire became changed. She had built a career reading people and situations, identifying value where others didn't see it. She applied that same instinct to a question that consumed her after her sister's death. The question was simple. He met Ethan's eyes. Does kindness still exist when nobody is watching? Ethan heard those words and felt them in a way that went below his ribs. She started doing this approximately 8 years ago, Sandra Reeves said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quieter than Whitfield's, more careful. She would travel to different cities, to different neighborhoods. She had a team who helped her select locations and maintain the cover. She'd spend days, sometimes weeks, presenting as a homeless woman, observing how people responded. She documented everything. Ethan thought about that last look at the diner door, that room behind a room quality in her eyes. She hadn't been exhausted. She'd been watching. "How many times did she do this?" he asked. "Over 8 years?" "Dozens," Sandra said. "Hundreds of interactions. In dozens of cities." Ethan looked at the table. "And how many people helped her?" he asked. The lawyers exchanged a look. The kind of look that precedes a number nobody wants to say out loud. "A handful," Whitfield said. "Of genuine help, not performative. Not conditional, not pity. The kind you showed her. A handful." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He thought about all the people who had walked past her. In the rain. On cold nights. The people who'd looked at her shape, her clothes, her situation, and made a calculation in about half a second and kept moving. He thought about what that does to a person after weeks of it. After months. He thought about Diane, who had lived that reality for over a year. "She chose you specifically," Sandra said quietly. "Of the people who helped her in any meaningful way, she chose you." Ethan looked up. "Why me?" he asked. "If a handful of people helped her." "Because of Emily," Sandra said. Silence. "Because you were struggling." That was clear to her. She was trained in that she could read financial stress. She could read exhaustion. She knew what it looked like when someone was one bad week away from real trouble. Sandra held his gaze. "And you spent the last of your cash on a stranger anyway. Because your 8-year-old daughter pointed at a woman in the rain and said she needed help, and instead of explaining to your child why you couldn't, you just went." Ethan was very still. "She wrote about that," Whitfield said. He slid the envelope forward across the table. "She wrote this to you a few weeks ago, when she understood that her illness was progressing faster than expected. We hadn't been told to contact you, yet she was still making final decisions. But she wanted you to have this." Ethan looked at the envelope. His name in blue ink on the front. He reached out and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "The documents in the folder," Whitfield said carefully, "outlined the provisions Ms. Morgan made for you in her estate. We'll walk through all of it. But we thought you should read the letter first." Ethan held the envelope. He looked at both lawyers. "Can I have a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Whitfield said. "Take all the time you need." They stepped out. Ethan sat alone in the conference room on the 14th floor, the city moving far below him, the envelope in his hands, his name in a dead woman's handwriting on the front. He opened it. The letter was 3 pages, written by hand. The handwriting was careful and precise, the kind that belongs to someone who thinks about every word before committing it to paper. He read it slowly. The first line stopped him entirely. "Mr. Carter, you didn't see a homeless woman. You saw a human being. And in 22 years of business, I have learned that the ability to see past what is obvious to what is real is the rarest thing in the world." He read on. She wrote about Diane, about the winter she lost her sister, about the years she'd spent asking the question her grief had given her. She wrote without self-pity and without drama, the way you write when you've had a long time to sit with something, and you are no longer angry at it, just honest about it. She wrote about Emily, Your daughter spoke to me like I was simply another person at the table. I don't know if you understand what that means after months of being looked at the way people look at things they find uncomfortable. She asked me about my favorite foods. She told me about her dragon book. She laughed with me. She saw me as a person. Because she has been taught to see people as people. That comes from you. He stopped reading. He pressed the letter flat on the table. He breathed. He was not a man who cried easily. He had built himself into a person who doesn't do that in public, who keeps it tucked in until he's somewhere private. He was in a law office downtown, and he was not going to cry in a law office downtown. He breathed very deliberately and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up the letter and kept reading. The last page. She had made her decision clearly and without ambiguity. That was how she did things. He could tell. She had structured her estate with meticulous care. She had left money to 3 nonprofits her sister had believed in. She had made provisions for her employees. She had organized everything the way a person organizes things when they know the time is coming and they want to make sure the mess they leave behind is as small as possible. And at the end of the list, she had written his name and Emily's name. And the number attached to both of their names was a number that Ethan read 3 times, out loud to nobody, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a Michigan Avenue office building, because his brain kept refusing to process it as real. He set the letter down. He sat in the quiet. He thought about $11. He thought about soup. He thought about the way Claire had looked at his daughter. Something behind those tired eyes, shifting, opening, like a door that had almost forgotten it knew how. He thought about what Marcus had said in the break room. You're a good father. I'm trying to be. That's the whole job. Trying. He sat there for a long time. Then he picked up the letter, folded it carefully back into the envelope, tucked it into the inside pocket of his good jacket, and stood up. He walked to the conference room door and opened it. Whitfield and Reeves were waiting in the hallway. They both looked at him. Not with pity, not with professional detachment. Something closer to actual humanity. Okay, Ethan said. His voice was completely steady. Tell me what she did. And they told him. Whitfield closed the conference room door behind them and set a second folder on the table, thicker than the first one. The kind of folder that means business in a way that makes your hands go slightly cold just looking at it. Ethan sat back down. He put both hands flat on the table. A grounding gesture, though he didn't think of it that way. He just needed to feel something solid. Walk me through it, he said. Whitfield sat down across from him and opened the folder with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this many times and understands that the kindest thing you can do in this moment is be clear and be quick. Miss Morgan's estate is divided into several categories, he began. Charitable endowments to 3 organizations she had supported for years. Provisions for key employees and partners at Morgan Capital. And then a separate category which she structured personally and specifically that pertains to you and your daughter. Ethan watched him. Before I give you numbers, Whitfield said, I want you to understand that these provisions are unconditional. There are no performance requirements, no behavioral clauses, no obligations attached. She made that explicit in the documentation. She was very clear about it. Why? Ethan asked. Whitfield looked at him. She said, and I'm paraphrasing from the trust document itself, that conditional generosity is just control wearing a different coat. She didn't believe in it. Ethan sat with that for a second. All right, he said. Tell me. Sandra Reeves leaned forward slightly and turned a page in the second folder toward him. Ethan looked at the number on the page. He looked at it for a long time. He looked up at Sandra, then at Whitfield, then back at the page. That's... He started, yes, Whitfield said. That's not... He stopped again. Mr. Carter, Sandra said gently. It's real. The account has already been set up. The transfer is pending only your signature and identity verification, which we can complete today if you're ready. Ethan pushed back from the table slightly. Not away from the documents, just back. Like he needed 6 more inches of air. He thought about the parking garage he'd avoided that morning because it was $22. He thought about the brake pads he'd been postponing for 3 weeks. He thought about the sandwich he'd made at 6 in the morning because buying lunch at the warehouse was $4.50 and $4.50 had a different job. He thought about $11. He looked at the number on the page again. She didn't know me, he said. It came out quieter than he intended. No, Whitfield agreed. She didn't. That was the point. Ethan pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then he dropped his hands back to the table and looked at both lawyers clearly. What exactly did she leave, he asked. Break it down for me, not just the number. What specifically? Sandra turned to the next page. A fully paid home, she said. Miss Morgan owned a property in Evanston that she purchased 12 years ago and maintained as a rental property. She has transferred title to you outright. No mortgage. No liens, it's yours. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He said nothing. He was listening. A education trust for your daughter, Sandra continued. Fully funded. It covers tuition, housing, books, and living expenses at any accredited institution Emily chooses to attend. It also includes a supplemental fund for any postgraduate education she decides to pursue. The principal has been structured to grow until she reaches college age. Ethan thought about Emily sitting on the edge of her bed last night, closing her dragon book, saying the girl made the right choice because she let him go, because it was his life, not hers to keep. He breathed. There's also a personal financial provision, Sandra said. A sum placed into a trust in your name, with distributions structured to provide financial stability without creating dependency. Miss Morgan worked with a financial advisor she trusted to design the structure. She was very specific about not wanting you to simply receive a windfall and then be left to manage it alone. She thought of that? Ethan said. She thought of everything, Whitfield said quietly. That was who she was. There was a beat of silence. And finally, Sandra said, and she paused slightly before the last item. The way you pause before the thing that's going to hit hardest. She established a foundation. She funded it, named it, and structured its mission. But she left the leadership of it to you. Ethan looked up sharply. To me? To you, Sandra confirmed. The Claire Morgan Foundation. Its mission, as she specified, is to provide meals, temporary housing support, and reentry resources for homeless individuals and struggling single parents in the Chicago metropolitan area. She met his eyes. She said you would know what it needed because you had lived what it needed. The room went very quiet. Ethan sat in it. He thought about every morning he'd driven to the warehouse in the dark, every delivery he'd done past midnight, every time he'd skipped lunch and told himself it was fine. It was fine, you don't need it. Every time he'd stood in a grocery aisle and done the math in his head and put something back on the shelf. He thought about how many other people were doing exactly that math right now, in exactly that aisle, putting something back on the shelf and hoping their kid didn't notice. She trusted me to run it, he said. She trusted you to understand it, Whitfield said. Those are different things, and she knew the difference. Ethan looked at the table for a long moment. When he looked up, his face was composed, but his eyes were doing something he wasn't entirely in control of. I bought her a bowl of soup, he said. Whitfield nodded slowly. I know. She could have given this to anyone. Someone qualified. Someone who knows how to run. Mr. Carter, Whitfield said, and his voice had something in it now that wasn't purely professional. In 20 years of estate law, I have read hundreds of final letters. Most people, when they know the end is coming, try to explain themselves. They justify their decisions. They defend their choices. He paused. Claire's letter, the one she wrote to you, was the clearest, most certain document I have seen from anyone in her situation. She didn't explain herself. She didn't justify anything. She simply told you the truth, and then told you what she decided. He looked at Ethan steadily. She did not make decisions she wasn't sure of. Not once in 30 years. She was sure of this one. Ethan looked at the folder. He picked up the pen Sandra slid toward him. He held it for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. When she was doing this traveling, pretending to be homeless, was she doing it by herself? Whitfield and Sandra exchanged a brief look. She had a small team, Sandra said. A driver who stayed nearby, a security consultant who monitored situations remotely, and a personal assistant who coordinated logistics. Did any of them try to talk her out of it? Ethan asked. Sandra almost smiled. Constantly. And she listened to every argument they made, considered it carefully, and then did what she intended to do anyway. Sandra's expression held something like genuine affection. She was not a woman you talked out of things. Ethan thought about the steadiness in Claire's voice when she'd said, "I'm fine. Thank you in the rain." The way she'd looked at him. The room behind a room. He'd been right. There had been something else there. He just hadn't known what it was. He signed the first document. His hand was steady. He was surprised by that. He'd expected to feel the enormity of it through the pen, through his arm, into his chest. Instead, he felt something quieter, something that wasn't quite calm, but was adjacent to it. He signed the second document, and the third. By the time he'd signed everything Whitfield put in front of him, it was 11:45 in the morning. He had missed his entire warehouse shift. He would need to call Marcus. He would need to explain something he didn't yet have words for. When he stood up to leave, Sandra handed him a business card. "The foundation has a board of 3 trustees who Claire appointed," she said. "They've been briefed. They're expecting to hear from you when you're ready." There's no rush, she built in a 90-day transition period before any formal operations begin. She anticipated you'd need time to process all of this. Ethan took the card, held it. "She anticipated a lot," he said. "She did," Sandra said. "She was very good at it." He shook both their hands. He meant it a firm, real handshake, the kind that says "I see you," not just the social gesture. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. He stood alone in the elevator as it descended 14 floors, and somewhere around the 9th floor something broke open in his chest in a way he had no interest in stopping. And he let it go for exactly the time it took to reach the lobby, because that was all the time he was willing to give it in a public building. But he gave it that time, fully and honestly, and without embarrassment. The doors opened at the lobby. He walked out. His face was dry. His eyes were clear. His back was straight. He walked 6 blocks back to his car in the November air. He sat in the Focus for a long time without starting it. He put his hands on the steering wheel and looked at the street through the windshield and listened to the city do what cities do, which is keep moving, regardless of what happens to anyone inside it. He took the letter out of his inside pocket. He didn't read it again. He already knew what it said. He just held it. He thought about what Whitfield had said. That she'd been sure. That she didn't make decisions she wasn't sure of. He thought about the last thing she'd said to him at the diner door. Yes, they do. She'd said it like she already knew something he didn't. She had. He started the car. The brake pad sound greeted him like an old complaint. He almost laughed. He pulled out into traffic and drove toward his daughter's school. He had 2 hours before pickup. He drove to a diner, not Henderson's. A different one. A place he'd never been before, and he sat in a booth and ordered coffee and a full breakfast. The kind he never ordered, with eggs and toast and bacon. The kind that comes on a plate big enough that it doesn't fit your budget or your sense of proportion when you're calculating everything to the penny. He ate the whole thing. He sat with his coffee and thought about how to tell Emily. That question occupied him for most of the 2 hours. Not the logistics, the foundation, the house, the lawyers. All of that would unfold in its own time, and he trusted himself to manage it because he had managed everything else. What occupied him was the question of Emily, and what you say to an 8-year-old when a stranger who made her laugh in a diner 3 weeks ago turns out to have changed both their lives forever. He thought about what Claire had written. She saw me as a person because she has been taught to see people as people. That comes from you. He folded the receipt and left a generous tip. He drove to school. Emily came through the doors at 3:15, with her backpack bouncing and her library book tucked under her arm, and a piece of paper she was holding very carefully that turned out to be a drawing she'd made in art class, a dragon, orange and blue, sitting on what appeared to be a pile of treasure. She handed it to him. "His name is Gerald," she said. "Gerald the dragon. He's very rich but very lonely," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "So the treasure doesn't really help." Ethan looked at the drawing, then at his daughter. "Emily," he said. Something in his voice made her go still. She was good at reading his voice. She'd been calibrated to him for 8 years. "What?" she said. "Remember Claire from the diner?" Emily's face changed. She went quiet, in the way she went quiet when things mattered. "Yeah," she said. "She passed away," Ethan said carefully. "A little while ago. She was sick." Emily absorbed that. She looked at the drawing of Gerald in his hands. "I'm sad," she said simply. "Me too." She had a nice laugh, Emily said for the second time. She'd said it Sunday night, and she said it now, and it was the same sentence both times. Exact and certain. The way you say things when they are the truest thing you know about someone. "She did," Ethan said. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did something happen?" "With the meeting." Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about how to start. "You know how I always say a person's worth isn't decided by their situation," he said. "Yeah. And how what you do when nobody's watching is who you actually are." Emily looked at him steadily. "Yeah. Well," Ethan said, "it turns out Claire had been watching. And what she saw what you did, Bug. When you looked through that window and said she needs help, it mattered more than you know." Emily frowned. Not in confusion, in concentration. So he told her. He did it simply and honestly, without making it into more than it was, and without making it into less. He told her about the lawyers, about the letter, about Diane, about the years Claire had spent asking her question and not getting the answer she was looking for until a cold Tuesday night in November when an 8-year-old looked through a diner window and saw a person instead of a problem. Emily listened to all of it without interrupting. That was rare for her. When she was processing something real, she went completely quiet, like she needed all available bandwidth for the incoming information. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So she wasn't homeless," Emily said finally. "No. She was testing people. Yeah, to see if they were kind when it was hard." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Exactly that." Emily looked out the window. "A lot of people weren't," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Ethan said. "A lot of people weren't." "That's sad," Emily said. "For them. Because they probably think they're kind people. But they weren't when it counted." Ethan stared at his daughter. Yeah," he said. "That's exactly right. People are strange," Emily said, with the philosophical resignation of someone who has been studying the species for 8 years and has drawn conclusions. She turned back to look at him. "Are we okay now?" she asked. "Like money okay? Yeah, Bug, we're going to be okay? Really okay? Or just okay like you tell me we're okay when you skip lunch?" Ethan felt the air go out of him. She had known. She'd always known about the lunches. Of course she had. "Really okay," he said. "Really." She nodded. She turned to look back out the window. "Good," she said. "Because I didn't like it when you skipped lunch. I could tell you were hungry, and you thought I couldn't tell, but I could always tell." Ethan gripped the steering wheel.
"It's okay, Dad." She said it matter-of-factly.
Not with the weight of accusation, just the weight of fact. "You were doing what you had to do. I know that. I just didn't like it." He didn't trust himself, so he thing of that. So he didn't say anything. He reached over and briefly squeezed her shoulder, and she let him, and that was the whole conversation. They drove home that evening. After dinner, Ethan called Marcus. He didn't know where to start, so he started at the beginning, the voicemail, the law firm, the woman from the diner. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was not his usual mode, which told Ethan that Marcus understood this was not the kind of story you interrupt. When Ethan finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The woman from the diner," Marcus said finally. "The one you mentioned a few weeks back." "Yeah. You bought her soup." "Yeah." Another pause. "Man," Marcus said. And then nothing else for a moment, because what else is there? "I didn't do it for this," Ethan said. It was important to him that Marcus understood this. I wasn't calculating anything. I just did it, I know," Marcus said. "That's the whole point, isn't it? It wasn't a question. If you'd been calculating, she'd have seen it. She was watching for exactly that." Ethan hadn't thought about it quite that way. But the moment Marcus said it, he knew it was true. Claire had spent years being tested by people who looked like they were helping, but wanted something. She'd know it in under a minute. She'd spent 8 years developing that particular radar. He'd slipped through it because he hadn't been performing anything. He'd just been himself. A tired man in a worn-out jacket doing what his daughter told him was right. "What are you going to do with it?" Marcus asked. "The foundation?" "All of it." Ethan leaned in his kitchen chair. He looked around the apartment, the small kitchen, the cracked ceiling tile in the corner. He'd reported to the landlord twice. The refrigerator that made a sound at night, the drawings Emily had taped to the walls because they had no frames. Move first, he said. Get Emily somewhere better. Good. And then the foundation. I've got 90 days before it officially starts, but I want to go faster than that. There are people sitting in that gap right now. I don't want to spend 90 days thinking about it. You're going to need help, Marcus said. Running a foundation isn't like running a warehouse line. I know. You gonna ask for it? Ethan thought about the number of times in the last 2 years he'd refused to ask for help because asking felt like the beginning of a conversation he didn't want to have. He thought about the lunches. He thought about Emily saying, "I could always tell." "Yeah," he said. "I'm going to ask for it." Marcus was quiet for a second. "You know I'm here, I know. Whatever you need." "I know." Marcus. A pause. "You did good," Marcus said. "That night at the diner. You did the right thing. Emily told me to. And you listened." Marcus's voice had something warm and real in it. That's the part that counts. A lot of people don't listen to the 8-year-old. After he hung up, Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a while. He wasn't doing the math. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't doing the math. He was just sitting with the strange new weight of a life that had shifted on its axis in a single morning and was still finding its new center. He took Claire's letter out of his pocket and set it on the table. He read it again. The whole thing, slowly, the way you read something you want to keep. He got to the middle page, a section he'd read quickly the first time in the conference room, and hadn't fully absorbed. Claire had written about the night at the diner specifically. She'd written about watching him come through the door from the street, about the way he'd walked over to her, not with the body language of someone performing charity, not with the self-conscious deliberateness of someone who wanted to be seen being good. He'd walked over with the directness of a man who had made a decision and was executing it, and the absence of performance had been the thing that stopped her before he'd even spoken. She wrote that she'd almost broken cover. Almost. That she'd stood there in the rain and watched him cross the street, and something had happened in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time, and she'd had to work very deliberately to stay in the role, to stay in the posture, to keep her face where it needed to be. She wrote, "I have met billionaires who couldn't buy what you carried into that diner. You gave me what money cannot manufacture and power cannot command. You gave me dignity without even knowing I was asking for it." Ethan set the letter down. He was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the city moved. Somewhere above him, the couple upstairs walked across their floor. The refrigerator made its sound. The cracked ceiling tile was still cracked. He picked up his phone and opened the bank app. The number had changed. He looked at it for a long time. It still didn't feel real. He suspected it would take a while before it felt real. Maybe a long while. Maybe the feeling of not quite believing it was just the tax you paid on having come from a place where you counted $11 twice, hoping it would change. He closed the app. He went to check on Emily. She was asleep, the dragon drawing taped to the wall above her bed where she'd put it when they got home. Gerald and his lonely treasure, orange and blue. Ethan stood in the doorway. He thought about Claire standing in the rain that Tuesday night. That specific stillness. The plastic bag. The look she'd been carrying for months. The weight of being unseen by person after person after person. He thought about what Whitfield had said a handful. Out of hundreds of interactions over 8 years. A handful of real and unconditional kindness. And he thought about all the people who had walked past her. Who had looked at her size. At her clothes. At the way she was standing. And done the math, the different kind of math. The one that calculates social cost and personal inconvenience, and kept walking. Those people didn't know they were failing a test. That was the cruelest part. They didn't know it was a test. They were just being who they were when they thought nobody of consequence was watching. That's who you actually are. He'd said that to Emily once. He'd meant it as guidance. He hadn't known, when he said it, that a stranger was already 6 cities into the project of proving it. He went to bed. He set his alarm. Not for 4:45, for 7. He lay in the dark and listened to the building and thought about a woman named Diane who had lived on the streets for over a year and felt herself become invisible to the world and died in a winter storm at 31 years old, and whose sister had spent the following 12 years building The kind of success that lets you ask the most expensive question in the world. Does kindness still exist when nobody is watching and had paid? Personally, in time and in cold, and in the specific humiliation of being ignored, until she had her answer. The answer was yes. It was a warehouse worker with $11 and a daughter who looked through windows. The answer was yes, and it had cost Claire Morgan a bowl of soup and 40 minutes in a corner booth of a neighborhood diner, and she had taken that answer and done something with it that would outlast her. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about the foundation, about the 90 days he was going to compress into 30, about the trustees Claire had appointed, and the meeting he would set up before the week was out. About the gaps, the specific, daily, grinding gaps that he knew from the inside because he had lived in them, that he was now going to have the means to do something about. So he thought about all the people sitting in those gaps right now. He thought about Emily saying, "I could always tell." He thought about what it would mean for another kid, somewhere in this city, to grow up and not have to know their parent was hungry. He let that thought settle into the bones of him. And then he slept. The next morning, for the first time in 2 years, he woke up before his alarm. He lay in the dark for a moment. Then he got up. He made coffee, real coffee, the kind you actually take your time with, not the reheated yesterday's cup he'd been making since he couldn't remember. He sat at the kitchen table while it was still dark outside, and he got out a legal pad, the one he kept in the junk drawer for things that needed writing down, and he started making a list. Not the math list. Not the rent and bills and brake pads list. A different list. A what needs to happen list. A where do we start list. He wrote for an hour before Emily woke up. When she came into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, she stopped and looked at him at the table with his coffee and his legal pad covered in handwriting. "You're up early," she said. "I had things to write down." She looked at the legal pad. Back at him. "Good things or bad things?" "Good things," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went to pour herself cereal. She sat down across from him and ate, and he kept writing. And the two of them sat in the early morning in the small apartment that would soon not be their home anymore, in the particular quiet of a life that was standing at the exact moment before it changed completely. And neither of them needed to say anything about it. Some moments are complete exactly as they are. Outside, the city was starting to wake up. Ethan Carter had work to do. The legal pad had 14 items on it by the time Emily finished her cereal. Ethan looked at the list. Not everything on it was a task he knew how to do. Some of it was framework rough shapes of ideas that didn't have forms yet. Things he'd need other people to help him build into something real. But that was fine. He'd built things from rough shapes before. He knew how that worked. You start with the outline and you fill it in as you go. And you don't wait until you have all the answers before you take the first step, because if you wait for all the answers you never take the first step. He had learned that in a warehouse. He suspected Claire had learned it in a boardroom. Either way, the lesson was the same. He called Sandra Reeves at 8:30 that morning. Before he'd even figured out what he was going to say, she picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Carter, I want to meet the trustees," he said. "This week if possible. I know there's a 90-day window, but I don't want to use it." A brief pause. "All right. Can I ask why the urgency?" "Because there are people in those gaps right now," he said. "The same gaps I was in 3 weeks ago. Every day we spend in a transition period is a day somebody goes without something they need. I don't want to build a foundation that runs on 90-day transition periods." Another pause. "Longer this time. I'll make some calls," Sandra said. "Can you do Thursday?" "Yes. I'll confirm by end of day." He hung up and looked at his legal pad. Item 1, meet the trustees, now had a date next to it. He circled it. The days between Monday and Thursday moved differently than any days Ethan could remember in recent years. Not slower, not faster. Just differently, with a quality of attention he didn't usually have, because usually all of his attention was consumed by the machinery of keeping their life running, and there was nothing left over for anything else. Now, for the first time in a long time, there was something left over. He still went to the warehouse Tuesday and Wednesday. He wasn't scheduled, but he went in anyway and talked to his supervisor, a guy named Dale, who was fair in the way that some supervisors are fair. meaning he wasn't trying to be your friend, Ikisity, but he also wasn't trying to make your life harder, and told him he needed to adjust his schedule. Not quit. Adjust. Dale looked at him for a moment. Everything okay? Yeah, Ethan said. Actually better than okay. I've got something I'm starting. It's going to take more of my time. Something good? Yeah, Dale studied him. You've been here 6 years. I know. Good worker. He said it the way Dale said everything, flat, factual, no ornamentation. You need a reference, you've got one. Ethan shook his hand. He worked Tuesday and Wednesday anyway. Not because he had to. Because Marcus was there, and because walking away from something cleanly matters, more than walking away from it fast, and because he wanted to look the guys on his line in the eye and say goodbye, like a man who respected what they'd done together in that building every day for 6 years, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Marcus walked him to the parking lot Wednesday afternoon. They stood by the Focus for a minute, in the cold, the way men stand when there's more to say than either of them is going to say. You're going to be good at it, Marcus said finally. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. You know what people need when they don't have anything, Marcus said. That's the first thing. Everything else is logistics. Ethan looked at his friend. 6 years of early mornings, and break room coffee, and covering for each other, and the particular trust that builds between people who work hard in the same place for a long time. Thank you, Ethan said. For what? For 6 years of being decent. Marcus looked at him. Then he reached out and shook his hand, a real handshake. The kind that holds for a moment, and means something. Go do something good with it, Marcus said. Ethan drove away. He didn't look back at the building. Some exits need to be clean. Thursday morning arrived with the particular clarity of a day you've been thinking about for 4 days. He dressed deliberately, not his warehouse clothes, not the good jacket from Michigan Avenue, something in between. Something that said, I'm taking this seriously, but I'm not performing it. He made sure Emily had everything for school. He drove her there himself, earlier than necessary, and when she got out of the car, she turned and looked at him with that direct, reading the room attention. Big day, she said. Yeah, you're going to be good, she said. No hedging. No maybe, just the fact of it stated simply, the way she stated all facts. How do you know? She shrugged. Because you always try to do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what Claire saw. That's what the trustees are going to see too. She hoisted her backpack. Trust yourself, Dad. She walked through the school doors. He sat in the parking lot for 30 seconds, staring at the space where she'd been. 8 years old. He drove downtown. The meeting with the trustees was at the offices of the foundation's administrative coordinator, a woman named Patricia Okahor Flood, who had worked in nonprofit management for 20 years and whom Claire had recruited 3 years earlier, apparently for exactly this eventuality. She was in her mid-50s, precise, warm in a way that didn't waste words, and she shook Ethan's hand when he walked in with the firmness of someone who has decided to respect you before you've proven yourself and intends to update that assessment based on evidence. I've read the file Claire left on you, Patricia said. She was thorough. She was watching pretty carefully, Ethan said. She always watched carefully. It's how she built everything she built. Patricia gestured to a table where 2 other people were already seated. These are your trustees. Avery Bloom, who chairs our grants committee, she's been with nonprofits for 15 years, and Thomas Nguyen, who handles financial oversight and previously worked with Claire's investment firm. Avery Bloom was younger than Ethan expected, late 30s, with the kind of focused energy that comes from caring deeply about the work. Thomas Nguyen was closer to 60, quiet and deliberate, the kind of man who listens first and speaks when he has something to add. Ethan sat down. I want to start by being honest with you, he said, looking at all 3 of them. I'm not a nonprofit professional. I don't have a background in organizational management. What I have is 6 years of working a warehouse job and 3 years of delivery work at night to keep my daughter and me above water, and a pretty detailed understanding from the inside of exactly what it feels like to be 1 bad week away from not having enough. He let that land. Claire left this to me because of that understanding, he continued. Not despite my background. Because of it. And I want to honor that by being clear about what I know and asking for help with what I don't. Patricia looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Claire said you'd say something like that, she said. Ethan blinked. She left notes, Thomas said, and there was something in his voice, not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it. She left very detailed notes on what she expected from this meeting. Avery opened a folder and slid a single page across the table. Ethan picked it up. It was a memo. Claire's letterhead. Dated 8 weeks earlier, he scanned it. She had written, in her precise and certain way, that Ethan would come to the first meeting. Before the 90-day window was up, she'd predicted within the first week. She had written that he would open with honesty about his limitations, because that was what she had observed about him. That he didn't front-load confidence he didn't have. And she had written a single directive for the trustees at the bottom of the memo. Follow his instincts on the ground-level operations. He knows what's needed because he has needed it. Trust that knowledge the way I do. Ethan set the memo down. He looked at Patricia. She wrote this 8 weeks ago, he said. Yes. She didn't know for sure I'd come in before the 90 days. No, Patricia said. She was betting on it. She bet right. She usually did. There was a moment in the room, a collective recognition of the woman they were all gathered because of the woman who had built the machinery of this moment from 12 years of grief and certainty and the kind of love that doesn't dissolve when the person is gone. Thomas broke the silence first. So, what's on your list? Ethan reached into his jacket and took out the legal pad. He put it on the table. Thomas looked at it. Avery looked at it. Patricia looked at it, and something in her expression shifted towards something genuine. Walk us through it, Thomas said. So Ethan walked them through it. He talked about meals, real meals, not just food bank distribution, but actual hot food distributed to people in the specific locations where homeless individuals congregated, at the specific times, early morning, late evening, when the other services had closed and the gaps opened up. He talked about the gap between emergency shelter availability and the people who fell through it, who were too functional for one system and too broken for another. He talked about single parents, specifically, the ones working nights like he had worked nights, the ones doing the math at 2 in the morning, the ones whose kids were figuring out the lunches. He talked for 20 minutes without stopping. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Avery was looking at him with an expression that was no longer evaluating. It had already decided. You've been thinking about this for a long time, she said. No, Ethan said. I've been living it for a long time. The thinking only started last week. Thomas leaned forward. The structure you're describing for the meal distribution, there are organizations in the city already doing adjacent work. We could partner rather than build from scratch. That gets you operational faster. That's what I was hoping you'd say, Ethan said. The single-parent component is less developed in the existing landscape, Avery said. There are programs, but nothing with the specificity you're talking about. That's where the foundation could genuinely fill a gap. That's where I want to focus first, Ethan said. They talked for 3 hours. By noon, they had a working outline. Not a plan. A plan takes longer. But a working outline. A direction. A set of first steps that everyone in the room understood and agreed to. Patricia would begin outreach to 3 partner organizations by end of week. Thomas would structure a first-year budget proposal based on Ethan's priorities. Avery would identify 3 pilot locations for the meal distribution within the month. Ethan would be the public face of it. That part landed on him differently than the rest. Public face? He said. Claire wanted the foundation to have a face that reflected its mission, Patricia said, carefully. She believed that a single parent who had struggled, who had experienced the gaps personally, that person, standing in front of cameras and donors and community members, would communicate something that no polished nonprofit executive could. She wanted, you specifically, Avery said. Thus, not a professional spokesperson, you. Ethan looked at the table. He thought about standing in front of cameras. He thought about the story, the diner, the soup, the whole strange chain of events being told publicly. He thought about people knowing his name and his face in connection with something that had started with $11 and a bowl of chicken soup on a cold Tuesday night. So, I'm going to need some time with that part, he said. Take it, Patricia said. But not too much. He left the building at 12:30. He had pickup at 3:15. He drove to Henderson's. He didn't plan to. He just found himself pulling into the small parking lot on the side street and sitting in the car for a moment, looking at the front window of the diner. He went in. Donna was working. She recognized him. She always remembered regulars, even ones who only came occasionally, and she started to move toward their usual booth. "Sit anywhere," he said. "Course, honey." He sat in the booth they'd been in that night. Corner. Window. He ordered coffee and a grilled cheese, the good kind, with the tomatoes, the non-mushy kind, and he sat and looked out the window at the street where Claire had been standing in the rain. So, the street was just a street. Empty right now, midday. A delivery truck going past. A woman pushing a stroller. Nothing remarkable. He looked at the spot where she'd been standing, where Emily had seen her through this exact window. Donna came back with his coffee. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah." He paused. "Donna, do you remember a night? A few weeks back, Tuesday night. Cold, raining. I brought a woman in from outside. Heavy-set woman. Brown hair, damp." Donna's face shifted. "I remember. You didn't miss a beat," he said. "You brought her water. You gave her extra bread. You never made her feel like she was in the wrong place." Donna looked at him. "She was a person," she said simply. "Yeah." He looked at his coffee. "A lot of people didn't see her that way. A lot of people don't see, period," Donna said. "Too busy looking at what they want to see." She refilled his coffee cup. "You brought her in. That was the thing. You got up and went and brought her in. My daughter told me to. And you listened." She tucked the coffee pot back. "You'd be surprised how many parents don't listen to that." She left him to his food. He ate slowly. He didn't rush. He sat in Claire's booth, in Claire's diner in the city where it had all started, and he let himself feel the full weight of it. The strangeness, and the grief, and the responsibility, and the thing underneath, all of it, that he was still learning to name, which was something close to gratitude, but bigger than that word usually allows. He thought about Diane. He thought about her living on these streets, on streets like these, for over a year. He thought about the winter storm. He thought about Claire, spending 12 years building something monumental in her sister's memory, and then spending the last years of her own life standing in out clothes and standing in the rain to find out what kind of world Diane had died in. He thought about the answer she'd found. Not a great answer. A handful out of hundreds. But a real one. He was that answer. His 8-year-old daughter was that answer. He paid his bill. He left Donna the biggest tip he had ever left anyone. Because there are some gestures that aren't about the math, and this was one of them. He said thank you in a way that was specific, not the social thanks. The real one. Donna looked at him with the sharp, reading eyes of a woman who has worked a diner for years and has learned to read what people are carrying. "Something happened, didn't it?" she said. Not a question. "Yeah," he said. "Something happened." She nodded once. "Good," she said. "You deserved something happening." He walked out. He had 40 minutes before school pickup. He drove slowly. He was in no hurry. Something about sitting in that booth had settled him in a way he hadn't expected, as if returning the physical place where the thing had started had made it finally real in a way the legal documents and the signed papers hadn't quite managed. It was real now. All of it. He picked up Emily and they drove to Evanston. He hadn't told her where they were going. He had said they had an errand, and she'd accept that with characteristic reasonableness. She was reading in the passenger seat a new library book. Something about a girl who discovers she can talk to plants, and she didn't look up until they turned onto a quiet street in a neighborhood, with tall trees and houses set back from the sidewalk, with real yards. "Where are we?" Emily said. "We're going to look at something," Ethan said. He parked in front of a house. White 2 stories. A porch. A yard with an oak tree in it that had lost most of its leaves and was standing there in the November bare branch way that actually makes oak trees look like they're showing off their structure. A driveway, a garage. Emily put her book down. She looked at the house. She looked at him, back at the house. "Dad," she said slowly. "Yeah." "It's ours," he said, "if you want it." Emily was quiet for a long time. She looked at the porch. She looked at the yard. She looked at the oak tree that was bare and enormous, and very clearly a climbing tree if you were 8 years old, and knew what you were looking for. "There's a tree," she said. "Yeah, a big one, I noticed." She turned to look at him, and her face was something complicated, trying to contain several very large feelings at once. In the body of someone who has spent her whole life in a small apartment, she could hear everything and where. Her walls were covered in drawings, without frames. "Can I have my own room?" she said. "You can have your own room," he said. "With a door that closes all the way?" "With a door that closes all the way." She pressed her lips together. She was fighting something. She was 8 years old, and she was fighting something very large. "This is because of Claire," she said. "Yeah. Because we helped her. Because we saw her," Ethan said. "That's what she said. We didn't help a homeless woman. We saw a person." Emily looked back at the house. "I want to do something," she said. "What? When we move in? I want to do something for her. Not like a funeral thing. Something I don't know. Something that she would have liked." "What do you think she would have liked?" Emily thought about it seriously. "I think she would have liked for us to find someone else," she said. "Someone like she was. Someone who needs to be seen. And see them." Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about the foundation, about Patricia, and the partner organizations, and the pilot programs, and the 90 days he was going to compress into 30. He thought about the gaps and the people in them, and the specific daily machinery of need that most people drive past without slowing. "I think you're right," he said. "I think that's exactly what she would have wanted." "Then let's do that," Emily said simply. She reached over and took his hand. They sat in front of the house for a while, not getting out, just looking at it. The two of them, holding hands in the car, the way you hold on to something when you understand, even if you can't fully articulate it, that what you're looking at is different from what came before, and the difference is permanent, and the right response to that is not to rush through it, but to sit in it for a moment and let it be what it is. Eventually, Emily said, "Can we go inside?" "I've got the key," Ethan said. They went inside. She ran from room to room, the way children run through new spaces, not randomly, but with intent, taking inventory, mentally placing her things, identifying possibilities. She found the room she wanted on the second floor, the one with the window that looked out at the oak tree, and she stood in the middle of it and turned around once and said, "This one," with the finality of a decision that will not be revisited. Ethan stood in the doorway of the empty room and watched his daughter turn slow circles in the space that was about to be hers. He thought about the night he'd sat at the kitchen table in the old apartment while Emily slept, doing the math, alone in the quiet, the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding everything up by himself for so long that the holding has become his default posture. He thought about what it felt like to not have that math anymore. Not relief exactly. Not yet. It was too new and too large to process as relief. It was more like standing in a room where the noise has stopped and your ears are still adjusting and you can't quite believe the quiet is real. He thought about Claire in the rain. He thought about $11. He thought about Emily's voice through the diner window, that clear, factual 8-year-old certainty. She needs help. Dad. 3 weeks and 2 days since that sentence. He stood in the doorway of an empty room, in a house that was his, that belonged to him and his daughter, that had been left to them by a woman who had stood in the rain, by choice to answer a question her grief had given her, and he felt the full weight of what had been set in motion by a single decision on a Tuesday night. $11 with worn-out wallet. He felt it all the way through. And then Emily turned to look at him from the middle of her room, gap-toothed, bright-eyed, her library book still tucked under her arm. And she said, "Dad, are you going to stand in the doorway all day, or are you going to come see my room?" He laughed. "The real kind. The one that catches you." He walked into the room. They stood at the window together and looked out at the oak tree. "You know what I'm going to name it?" "Emily," she said. "The tree?" "You name trees," she said, as if this were obvious. "We should name it after her." "Claire," Ethan said. "Yeah." Emily looked at the tree. "Claire the tree. She's big, and she's been through a lot, and she's still standing." She nodded with the satisfaction of a solid decision well made. "That's right." Ethan looked at the tree. 12 years of grief. 8 years of cold nights in stranger cities. An entire life's work organized around one question, and the answer had cost $11.43. He thought about the foundation, about what they were going to build, about the people who needed to be seen, He thought about Donna at Henderson's. You'd be surprised how many parents don't listen to that. He thought about Marcus. That's the whole job. Trying. He thought about Claire's letter. You gave me dignity, without even knowing I was asking for it. He put his hand on the window. The oak tree stood in the yard, bare-branched, enormous, rooted deep, still standing. He thought, we have work to do. He thought, we know where to start. He thought, she trusted the right people. And then his daughter said, can we get pizza tonight? To celebrate. And he said yes, absolutely, without doing any math at all. And that small, ordinary, uncalculated yes felt like the realest thing that had happened all day. They locked up the house and got in the car. They got pizza. They went home to the apartment one more time. There was still packing to do, still calls to make, still work to begin. The foundation wouldn't build itself. The gaps wouldn't close on their own. The people in them were there right now. Tonight, in the cold, doing the math, putting things back on the shelf. He knew that. He was not going to forget it. But tonight, he sat across from his daughter in a pizza place and watched her eat with both hands and talk about the climbing potential of the oak tree with the specific technical focus of someone who has given the matter serious thought. And he was, for the first time in a very long time, not doing any math at all. He was just there, present, full, unguarded. The man he had always been trying to be when the weight let him. And somewhere in the city, in the gaps he was coming for, people were waiting for exactly what Claire Morgan had believed he would build. She had bet on him. He intended to prove her right. The foundation opened its doors on a Wednesday morning in January, 43 days after Ethan had signed his name in a conference room on the 14th floor of a Michigan Avenue building and learned that the world had been paying attention to him in ways he hadn't known. 43 days. Not 90. Patricia had told him the 90-day window was standard practice. He had told her he didn't want to be standard practice. She had looked at him for a moment with those precise, warm eyes of hers, and then she had said, fine, let's move. And they had moved. It was not a grand opening. He hadn't wanted one. He'd told Patricia specifically no ribbon cutting, no press release, no event with donors, standing around with glasses of wine, talking about the importance of giving back. He wanted the first day to be operational. He wanted the first thing the foundation did to be the actual thing, not the announcement of the actual thing. So on that Wednesday morning in January, 3 vans left a parking lot on the south side of Chicago at 6:45 in the morning, each carrying hot food, real food, not packaged, not shelf-stable, actual hot food prepared by a catering kitchen they'd contracted 2 weeks earlier to 3 distribution points in areas Patricia's research had identified as highest need. The volunteers in those vans were people Avery had recruited from 2 partner organizations. People who knew the territory, who knew how to show up in these spaces without making the people they were serving feel like subjects of a charity project. Ethan was in the first van. He'd told Patricia he wanted to be there for the first run. She hadn't argued. She'd just made sure he knew the route. He rode in the passenger seat while a volunteer named Jerome drove. Jerome, who was 28 and had been doing this kind of outreach work for 4 years, and who had the particular combination of warmth and matter-of-factness that you need when your job is showing up for people in their hardest moments. Jerome talked while he drove, not nervously, just naturally, filling Ethan in on the specific dynamics of each location, who to look for, who was likely to refuse the first time and accept the second, who had particular needs that weren't obvious. The man at the second stop calls himself Bishop, Jerome said. He won't take food from someone he doesn't recognize. He'll take it from me. Don't push him. If he sees you show up consistently enough, eventually he'll take it directly from you. But you can't rush that. How long does it take? Ethan asked. Depends on the person. Jerome glanced at him briefly. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. You have to be there enough times that your presence stops being a variable. You become part of the landscape. Then they can trust you. Ethan thought about that, about what it means to need someone's presence to become predictable before you can let them help you, about the kind of experience that teaches a person to build that wall. He thought about Diane, over a year on these streets, over a year of people becoming part of the landscape by walking past. I'll be there, Ethan said. Jerome looked at him. Every week? Jerome nodded once and said nothing else and drove. The first stop was a location near an underpass, where a small group of people had established a more or less permanent encampment, not because they had chosen it as a destination, but because they had run out of road. Jerome knew most of them by name. He introduced Ethan without making it a production. Just, "This is Ethan. He's with us now." A woman named Rosa took a container of food and looked at Ethan with eyes that had the same quality as Claire's eyes that night in the rain. That tired, calculating look. The one that's deciding whether you're safe. "You knew?" she said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You going to keep coming?" "Yes." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the food. "It's hot," she said. Not gratefully. Just noting the fact. As if hot food was something she had not taken for granted in long enough that she still registered it as a specific quality worth naming. "It should be hot every time," Ethan said. Rosa looked at him again. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet. But the first calculation in the direction of it. She walked away with her food. Jerome watched this from a few feet away and said nothing. They moved to the second stop. Bishop was exactly as Jerome had described, a large man in his 60s, with the weathered self-containment of someone who has learned to need as little from the world as possible in order to be less disappointed by it. He looked at Ethan across the space between them, assessed him in about 4 seconds, and then turned to Jerome. "Who's he?" "He's the man who's funding this," Jerome said simply. Bishop looked at Ethan again. "Why?" It was the same question Claire had asked him in the rain. The most basic one. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan had thought, since that night, about the real answer. Not the performance of an answer. The actual one. "Because I almost needed this," Ethan said. 3 months ago, I was one bad week away from real trouble. I had a daughter and a broken-down car, and not enough. Someone helped me. And I'm trying to do the same thing outward." Bishop looked at him for a long time. "Almost," he said. "Yeah. There's a difference between almost and actually." "I know," Ethan said. "I know there's a difference. I'm not pretending I understand what you've been through. I'm just telling you why I'm here." Silence. Bishop did not take food from Ethan that morning. He took it from Jerome, the way he always did. But as they were leaving, Ethan heard Bishop say quietly, to no one in particular, "He came himself. Most of 'em just send somebody." Ethan kept walking. He didn't react. But he filed it. They got back in the van and drove to the third stop. Jerome was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "That's the most Bishop has said to a new person in 2 years." Ethan looked out the window. "It's a start," he said. The news story broke 6 weeks later. Ethan hadn't looked for press. He'd specifically told Patricia to keep the media at a distance for the first operational month he wanted the work established, before the story of the work became more visible than the work itself. But these things have their own momentum, and the story was too strange and too human to stay contained for long. A reporter named Dana Kessler from the Tribune had heard something through the nonprofit circuit, had started asking questions, had called Sandra Reeves, who had referred her to Patricia, who had come to Ethan. "She wants to do a piece," Patricia said. "On Claire. On the foundation, on you. On me specifically? On the story. The diner, the whole thing." Ethan sat with that. He thought about standing in front of cameras. He thought about his face becoming part of a story that was really Claire's story. That was really Diane's story. That had just passed through him and Emily, on its way to becoming something larger. "Will it help the foundation?" he asked. "Significantly," Patricia said. "Donor visibility alone could double our capacity within the first year." He thought about Rosa taking the hot food and noting that it was hot, as if the temperature itself was a thing she needed to mark. He thought about Bishop saying he came himself. He thought about the people in the gaps, and how much more ground the foundation could cover with more resources. "Set it up," he said. The interview happened on a Thursday morning. In the foundation's offices, which were still spare 2 desks, a conference table, Patricia's organizational charts on the wall, the operational calendar Avery kept updated. No ornamentation, no mission statement framed on the wall, just the furniture of actual work. Dana Kessler was in her 40s, experienced, with the particular alertness of a journalist who has learned to listen more than she talks. She shook Ethan's hand and sat down across from him with a recorder and a legal pad and looked at him like she was reading something before he'd said a word. "Tell me about the diner," she said. She didn't start with biography, didn't start with the foundation, didn't start with Claire. She went straight to the diner, he told her. He told it plainly, the way he'd told Emily, the way he told Marcus, without embellishment. He told her about the $11. He told her about Emily looking through the window. He told her about crossing the street in the rain and the quality of silence before Claire decided to speak. He told her about the soup and the grilled cheese and the non-mushy tomatoes and Claire's laugh. The surprised one, the one that came back from somewhere far away. Dana wrote on her legal pad without looking down at it, keeping her eyes on him. "What did you think when you found out who she was?" Dana asked. "I thought about all the other people who had walked past her," Ethan said. "That was the first thing, not what she'd left me. What it meant that hundreds of people had made a different calculation in that same situation. What did it mean?" Ethan thought about how to answer this. He'd been thinking about it for weeks. "It meant that most people are performing kindness when they think it counts," he said. "When the person in front of them fits the category of someone worth being kind to. And Claire didn't fit that category for most people. She was heavy. She was in worn-out clothes. She was standing in the rain holding a plastic bag. The calculation most people made was that she wasn't worth the inconvenience." He paused. "My daughter didn't make that calculation because she's 8 and she hasn't learned to make it yet. And I didn't make it because she told me not to. And that's a pretty low bar. That's a pretty low bar for what passes as unusual kindness in this world." Dana stopped writing. "That's the story," she said quietly. "That's the problem," Ethan said. The Tribune piece ran the following Sunday. Front page of the Metro section. Above the fold. The headline was simple: "A bowl of soup and what came after." Dana had written it the way a good journalist writes things that are already true. She hadn't added drama. She hadn't softened anything. She'd just laid it out clean and let it be what it was. By Monday morning, Ethan's phone had more messages than he knew what to do with. By Tuesday, Patricia was fielding calls from 6 additional donors. By the end of the week, the foundation had received enough in new contributions to fund a second full year of operations before the first year was even finished. That wasn't the twist. The twist came from a call Patricia took on Thursday, 4 days after the article ran, from a woman named Margaret Ossie, who was the director of a community health organization in Detroit. She had read the piece. She had been trying to build something similar in her city for 3 years and hadn't been able to secure the funding. She wanted to know if Ethan would be willing to talk. Ethan called her that afternoon. Margaret spoke with the direct, exhausted passion of someone who has been fighting for something for a long time and has gotten very efficient about explaining why it matters. "The article described exactly what we've been trying to do," she said. "The gap between emergency shelter and stable housing, the single-parent component, the meal distribution, at the times other services aren't running. We've got the infrastructure and the community relationships. We just don't have the resources. And you want..." Ethan started.
"I want to know if the Claire Morgan Foundation would consider a partnership model," Margaret said.
"Not a takeover, not us becoming a satellite. A genuine partnership. We operate under our own name. We maintain our relationships, but we share resources, share operational learning, share the model." Ethan sat back in his chair. He looked at the operational calendar on the wall, at the growing list of names on the distribution route, at the photograph Patricia had printed and framed and put on the wall, without asking a photo had taken at the first morning's distribution run. Ethan standing with Jerome and Rosa, nobody posed. Just 3 people in the early morning, cold, doing the work. He thought about Claire, building a business for 22 years. About the precision and patience of it. About a woman who understood that the right structure, built carefully, could outlast any individual. He thought about Diane. He thought about how many cities Diane could have been in. How many cities had their own Dianes right now? "Can you send me your operational documentation?" he said. "I can have it to you by end of day," Margaret said. He read it that night after Emily was in bed. All of it. He made notes in the margins, the way he'd made notes on the legal pad, that first morning, the what needs to happen list. The where do we start list. But bigger now, reaching farther. He called Patricia at 7 the next morning. The Detroit organization, he said. Margaret O.C., Patricia said. I've already pulled their tax filings and their program reports. And? Solid. Very solid. She's been doing this on almost nothing for 3 years. The program outcomes are better than organizations with 10 times her budget. Because she knows what's needed from the inside, Ethan said. A brief pause. Yes, Patricia said. Exactly that. Set up a formal meeting, he said. I want to go to Detroit. I want to see the work on the ground. He went the following week. He spent 2 days with Margaret and her team, seeing the gaps and the people in them. The specific local texture of needs that were universal in their shape, but particular in their details. He met a man named Calvin, who had been living in his car for 8 months,
while working a full-time job at a distribution center.
the math of Chicago familiar to him from a different city, the same arithmetic of almost enough that grinds people down slowly without making enough visible noise to trigger the systems designed to help. He met a woman named Tanya who was raising 3 kids alone on 2 part-time jobs and had been on a waiting list for childcare assistance for 14 months and had developed the particular, tightly controlled effect of someone who has learned not to show how close to the edge they are because showing it doesn't help. He spent an hour with Tanya. He sat across from her in Margaret's community room, and he listened with the full attention of a man who knows from the inside what she is not saying because he has not said the same things himself. When he left, Tanya stood up and looked at him. Are you actually going to do something? She said. Not hostile. Just the raw, direct question of someone who has been in rooms with well-intentioned people before and watched them leave and not come back. Yes, Ethan said. How do I know you don't yet, he said. I know that, but I'm going to come back. And you'll see that I come back. And then you'll start to know. Tanya looked at him for a moment, with eyes that calculated risk, the way everyone in her situation has learned to calculate risk, measuring the cost of hoping against the cost of being wrong. She nodded. Once. Tight. The smallest possible gesture of provisional belief. He drove back to Chicago that evening, thinking about scale, about what it would mean to replicate the model not just in Detroit, but in other cities where the same gaps existed, with the same people falling through them. About what Claire had built over 22 years, a structure with real reach, real leverage, and about what she had done with that reach in the last years of her life. She hadn't just asked the question. She had built the capacity to answer it, and now she'd handed that capacity to him. He was on the highway, the city lights coming up ahead of him, when his phone rang through the car speakers. Emily's school name on the display, not the main number, the direct line from the front office. His stomach clenched the way it always did when the school called during the day. He answered. Mr. Carter? This is Anne from the front office. Nothing's wrong, Emily's fine. He exhaled. She asked us to call you, Anne continued. And there was something in her voice that wasn't standard office call neutrality. Something warmer. She wanted to tell you something, and she said it was important, and it couldn't wait until you got home. Ethan blinked. She asked you to call me. She was very polite about it, Anne said, and he could hear the smile. She said it was urgent. A pause, and then Emily's voice came on the line clear, certain, slightly breathless from what he suspected, was walking very fast to the office. Dad, hey Bug, you okay? I'm fine. I have to tell you something, okay? There's a girl in my class, Maya. She doesn't have a winter coat, like a real one. She's been wearing this thin jacket thing, and it's really cold, and I think her family doesn't have enough money right now, and she keeps saying she's not cold, but she is. I can tell. Ethan kept his eyes on the road.
Yeah? He said,
I told Mrs. Patterson, and Mrs. Patterson said she'd look into it, but I don't want it to take a long time because it's cold now. Not later. A pause. Can we get her a coat? A real one. Today, before it gets colder. He drove for a moment in silence. He thought about a Tuesday night in November. He thought about $11. He thought about the lesson he'd said to Emily, once what you do when nobody's watching is who you actually are. He thought about a woman who'd spent 8 years standing in the rain looking for the answer to a question about whether that was true. Dad, Emily, he said. We can get her a coat. Today, he said. Tell Mrs. Patterson I'll be there at pickup and we'll figure it out. A pause. Thanks, Dad. Her voice had the particular quality it had when she was trying to sound matter-of-fact about something that mattered to her deeply. She wasn't quite pulling it off, and he loved her for it. I knew you'd say yes. Did you think I'd say no? No, she said simply. I just needed to hear the yes. She hung up. He drove the rest of the way home with the city lights spreading out ahead of him and something in his chest that was too large and too quiet to have a simple name. He picked Emily up at 3:15. They went to a store and bought a coat, a real one. The warm kind. The kind with the good lining and the size Emily said was right. Which Emily knew because she had apparently done reconnaissance during recess. They drove to Maya's house. Emily knocked on the door with the coat in her arms. And when Maya's mother answered, Emily held it out and said, in the most straightforward way possible, "Hi, I'm Emily. Maya's in my class. I got this for her. It's getting cold." Maya's mother looked at this child holding a coat on her doorstep. She looked at Ethan standing back on the walkway, and something passed across her face that Ethan recognized. He had seen it on Claire's face in the diner. That particular expression when someone who has been expecting the world to look away finds, instead, that it is looking directly at them. "Thank you," Maya's mother said. Her voice was very careful. "Thank you very much. It's just a coat," Emily said cheerfully, and handed it over. In the car on the way home, Emily was quiet for a block. Then she said, "That's what Claire did, right?" When she came inside, she was just there, like it wasn't a big deal, like it was just a thing you do. "Yeah," Ethan said. "That's what she did. I want to do it like that," Emily said. "Like it's just a thing you do." "You just did," he said. She considered this. "I know," she said. "I just want to keep doing it." He looked at the road ahead. He thought about the foundation, and the partner in Detroit, and Margaret and Tanya, and Bishop and Rosa, and all the gaps, and all the people in them. He thought about how far the thing that started with $11 and a bowl of soup in a corner booth of a neighborhood diner had traveled in 4 months. He thought about Claire's letter, the part he had read, and reread, until he knew it without looking. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness, one meal, one conversation, one moment of true attention, sets something in motion that neither person can see yet. That is not a reason to wait until you understand it before you act. It is a reason to act before you understand it. He had not waited. He had crossed the street, and the thing that had been set in motion was still moving. 3 months after that, on a Thursday evening in April, Ethan stood at a podium in a community center on the south side of Chicago in front of an audience of about 200 people, donors, program participants, partner organizations, volunteers, journalists, city officials who had started paying attention, and a scattering of people from the neighborhood who had come because someone they trusted had said it was worth coming. He had written a speech. He had practiced it. He had shown it to Patricia, who had made 2 suggestions, both of which he'd taken, and to Emily, who had listened to the whole thing with her chin on her hand, and then said, "It's good. Say the part about the soup last. That's the part people will remember." He stood at the podium. He looked at the room. He thought about how long he'd spent in his life trying to be invisible in his struggles, keeping his head down, doing the math alone, pulling the weight without asking for help because asking felt like announcing defeat. He thought about Claire choosing, deliberately, to make herself visible in her struggle, to carry it in plain sight and see what the world would do. He thought about what courage that actually took. Not the abstract courage people talk about, but the specific, daily, cold and wet and ignored courage of standing in the rain and waiting to see if the world contained what you needed it to contain. He put his written speech face down on the podium. He looked at the room. 4 months ago, he said, I had $11. I had a daughter, and a broken-down car, and a rent that was overdue, and I was skipping lunch to make the math work. And I was fine. I mean that I wasn't in crisis. I was fine. I was doing what people do when they're determined to keep their kids safe and their life together. I was just tired. The room was quiet. And on a Tuesday night in November, my daughter looked through a diner window at a woman standing in the rain and said she needs help. Dad. And I went. He stopped for a moment. That woman was Claire Morgan. Most of you know the story by now. She wasn't homeless. She was one of the wealthiest people in this state. She had spent 8 years in dozens of cities, standing in the rain literally, standing in the cold and the rain to find out if kindness still existed when nobody important was watching. He looked at the audience. She found it, eventually, in a corner booth of a neighborhood diner, with a bowl of chicken soup and a kid asking about dragons. A sound moved through the room. Not laughter. Something softer. "Here is what I want you to understand," Ethan said. "Claire left me resources I could not have imagined, and I am going to use every cent of it for the mission she designed. But the thing she actually gave me, the thing that doesn't go in a financial report, was the understanding that the people in those gaps are not problems waiting to be solved. They are people waiting to be seen. And the difference between those two things is the whole difference." He paused. The Claire Morgan Foundation exists to close gaps. Meals, housing support, resources for single parents. We're operational in 2 cities, and we're building toward 5. We measure ourselves not in dollars distributed, but in the specific weight of what gets lifted when someone is treated like their situation doesn't decide their worth. He looked down for a moment. He picked up the written speech, and then he put it back down again. "My daughter bought a coat for a girl in her class last month," he said. She knocked on a stranger's door and handed it over and said it's just a coat and came back to the car. "She's 8 years old." He looked at the room. That's the whole lesson. It's just a coat. It's just a meal. It's just crossing the street. None of it is as complicated as we make it. The only complicated part is deciding to do it when it costs you something. He stepped back from the podium. The room responded in the way rooms respond when something true has been said in it, not immediately, but with a gathering, building recognition that started in the first few rows and moved outward. He found Emily in the second row, where he'd seated her next to Patricia. She was watching him with those steady, reading eyes of hers. Gap-toothed. 9 years old now, her birthday had been in February. Her first one in the new house, the one with the oak tree she'd named Claire. She gave him a thumbs up. Not a performance. Just the clear, factual signal of someone who has evaluated the situation and found it satisfactory. He smiled. After the event, he stood outside in the April air, and people came to shake his hand and say things to him. And he listened to all of it and meant his responses, because that was who he was. He was not a man who performed attention. He gave it. And the difference was the whole difference. And Claire had known that from 40 feet away in the rain on a Tuesday night. Patricia found him at the end of the evening, when the room had mostly cleared. "Detroit called," she said. "Margaret wants to talk about Indianapolis." "Another city?" "She's been in contact with an organization there. Same model, same gaps, same need." Ethan looked at the night. He thought about the legal pad on his kitchen table that first morning. 14 items, some of them still growing. "Set up the call," he said. Patricia nodded and walked away. He stood outside for a moment alone. He thought about Claire, standing in dozens of cities, in the rain, in the cold, carrying her question. He thought about all the versions of that question that different people carry, in different ways, the grief questions. The what does the world actually contain questions that only the worst losses produce. He thought about Diane. He thought about what it would mean if the foundation grew large enough, and present enough, and consistent enough, that a person like Diane, a person doing the specific, invisible, daily suffering of being unseen, would find someone there. Not a system, not a program, a person, looking directly at them, noting that the food was hot. That was the work. That was what Claire had paid for, with 8 years of cold nights, in strange cities. That was what $11 had started. He put his hand in his jacket pocket. He didn't have $11 in there anymore. But he still had the letter. He always kept the letter. He took it out and held it for a moment in the April air. The city moving around him. The Foundation's first public event winding down behind him. Detroit and Indianapolis ahead of him. Emily in the second row with her thumbs up. All of it radiating outward from a single Tuesday night when a tired man in a worn-out jacket crossed a wet street because his 8-year-old daughter had looked through a window and stated a fact. He put the letter back. He looked up at the sky. Claire Morgan had stood in the rain for 8 years, asking if kindness was real when it was hard and when no one important was watching. The answer was yes. It always had been. It just needed someone willing to cross the street to prove it.